Thank you for joining me in the pledge. It is my honor and opportunity to welcome everybody out today to this meeting on intergenerational poverty. It's a kickoff meeting to perhaps some future efforts that we hope to move forward with here in the county. And we have state representatives here to assist us, to provide us with counsel and as I'm told, resources. So we have several resources that we've brought together here locally to kind of address this issue so that we understand it correctly. And from the grassroots up, we can develop our plan. The purpose of us getting together today for this kickoff meeting is to inform county leaders of why intergenerational poverty has become a priority for the state of Utah. And because of such, we do have Lieutenant Governor Cox here with us today. Also explaining the history, the background, and the data, specifically the data related to Carbon County, and also to identify the impacts of intergenerational poverty in our area and potential solutions for that. With us today, if you'll just raise your hand, we have Ann Williamson, Executive Director, Department of Human Services, member of Intergenerational Welfare Reform Commission. We have Tracy Gruber, Senior Advisor and author of Intergenerational Poverty Annual Report. We have John Pierpont, the Executive Director of the Department of Workforce Services, Vice Chair of Intergenerational Welfare Reform Commission. We have, of course, the Lieutenant Governor Spencer Cox, Chair of the Intergenerational Welfare Reform Committee. We have Commissioner Potter. We have myself, Commissioner Jake Miller. We have Commissioner Casey Hopes. And we have Mayor Piccolo, who also sits on the Intergenerational Poverty Committee. So we're here today, and to get things rolling, we're just going to turn time over to Lieutenant Governor Spencer Cox. They've done this already in 3 other counties, so we're number 4. That's a good opportunity to be number 4. In baseball, that's where you put your big hitter, right? So without further ado, Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you, Commissioner. It's great to see so many of you here, many that I know as friends and some that I don't know and hope to get to know. I'm excited to be here and to share something that's become a real passion for me. And to do that, I want to give you just a little background, if it's okay, and share some personal experiences, if I might, on why I feel so strongly about what we're trying to accomplish here. For those of you that don't know me, I was born and raised just over that mountain right there in Sanpete County, in the small town of Fairview, and that's where I continue to make my home. I'm raising my kids there on the family farm. And so I have a little bit of a unique perspective when it comes to rural Utah, something that we don't see as much as we used to on the Wasatch Front. And so I get to be that voice for you and for our rural neighbors. And I've had a couple experiences that have led me on this journey. The first one started several years ago. I was serving as an ecclesiastical leader in my church there in Fairview, and I sat down with the guy who had been in that position before me, and we sat down together and we went over all of the problems in our area, all the families that had issues, and we talked through them, and he gave me all the details, kind of downloaded those all on me, and then he left, and I got to spend time working with those families for the next 5 years, and many others. Had a great experience. And then it was time for someone else to take a turn, and I sat down with that person, and I was going over all the problems that we had in the area, and I had this really depressing moment where I realized that the same families that I was told about 5 years ago were still the same families that had the same problems 5 years later. And despite all my efforts in working with them, nothing had really changed with them. So that was a little bit depressing, with a very notable exception. About a couple years into that time, I had this epiphany where I realized that every hour I spent with the kids in those families was worth about 100 hours spent with their parents. I could make a difference with those kids. And so I started to focus more of my time there. And I'm happy to say that many of those kids were able to go to college, are now out and doing successful things. And so there was that exception. The parents didn't change a whole lot, still had a lot of the same problems that we had before. The second realization I had came about 6 months ago. I was asked to be the lieutenant governor about 2.5 years ago, and it was a surprise to me, surprise to my family. I didn't run for it, so in this kind of unique position where I'm serving, and decided to keep my family in Fairview, which meant a really long commute every day to Salt Lake and back. It's about 100 miles from my front door to the Capitol, but we knew we wanted to stay where we live. We live where we live for a reason, right? You guys are all here for a reason. You could probably make more money, do different things somewhere else, but you're here. And so we made that sacrifice, but I said yes because I wanted to make a difference. I really felt like this was a great opportunity, not to have to run for office, which is just great because it's awful. I'm learning now, and two, because as a lieutenant governor, and I knew Lieutenant Governor Greg Bell, and having a governor who had been a lieutenant governor, I knew how involved he was in the decision-making processes, and again, I felt this responsibility to represent rural Utah, something we haven't had much of in the governor's office or in the executive branch specifically. So I got excited and I said yes. And I've got to tell you, I've worked my guts out for 2 years. I worked really hard. I've done a lot of things. I've missed a lot of events, my kids' softball games and baseball games and basketball games. And after 2 years, I sat down and was reevaluating. And again, kind of a depressing moment. As much as I wanted to make a difference, I realized I hadn't made a difference. And that wasn't for a lack of trying, but one of the things that I realized is that government was never designed, from the very beginning, back to our founding fathers, it was never designed to make a big difference. It was never designed to be nimble and reactionary and innovative and disruptive. It was never designed to be any of those things. I like to say I'm lucky to be in the executive branch because there's only 2 of us and only one that matters, and it's not me. But we kind of have a board of directors. For those of you in the business world, my board of directors is kind of the legislature, for lack of a better comparison, and they're great, and I served there for a year and I loved it. But imagine having 104 members of your board of directors who all think they know what's best for the state, and you don't get to choose any of them, right? It's just not designed to be really efficient and effective. And so with that background, I had a visit from a couple people, one from John Pierpont. You're going to hear more from him in a minute, and then a senator from Ogden, and you'll hear a little bit more about him as well. And he came and he sat down and they talked to me about this concept of intergenerational poverty, and all of a sudden it all started to come together for me. Some light bulbs started to go off. And what I realized, and this will make sense to a lot of you who have had experience in this area and just life experience in general, but they started to describe to me that not all poverty is the same. And that is something I'd never heard before, but something that suddenly made a lot of sense. And being now in this political world that was very different to me and a little foreign to me, I'm a Republican. I think everyone knows that, and my party will tell you that our welfare doesn't work, and that all of our poverty programs just haven't worked. In fact, the statistics bear that out to some extent. If you go back and look at the last 40 years since Lyndon B. Johnson's War on Poverty, we've spent about $20 trillion as a nation, and yet the poverty rate has remained virtually identical. And so Republicans will tell you, we're right, we've wasted all this money, it doesn't work. And then I have my friends who are Democrats telling me, no, it does work. And they would show me statistics where people come into these programs, these government programs, they get some help and they get back on their feet and they get out and they're working. And there are literally millions of examples of this happening. And the statistics bear that out too. And I just sat there and I thought, well, they can't both be right, or maybe they can. And that's where this all started to make sense as they sat down and talked to me. And what we realized was that for situational poverty, these programs work pretty well. And when we say situational poverty, you can imagine, you've seen this happen. Life's going along and then life happens, right? So somebody gets sick, they lose a spouse or a loved one, there's a divorce that happens, there's an accident, a car accident, their house burns down, whatever. A life event happens that throws them into a tailspin, and they come into these programs, they get the help they need, they get their feet back under them, and they get back out there and life improves and they get back on their feet. And these programs work pretty good for those people. Then there's another group of people, the people we'll refer to as this intergenerational poverty cohort, who grew up in poverty and on these government assistance programs, and they don't know any better, they don't know any different. This is just part of life and who they are, and they remain in these programs for generations. And not only do the programs not help them to get out, they actually sometimes have the opposite effect, that they keep people there. And the way the programs are designed incentivize people to stay where they are and not to try to get off of assistance and get out into the workforce, those that can. And so suddenly I realized this was a much more complicated issue than I had originally thought. And this idea, as was presented to me by John and others, that we could work together. See, one of the things as I've started to look at government, there are a couple things I think we can do. The government can be good at. One, we can be good at gathering data. And you're going to see some data today. There are opportunities to get better data, but with our higher education system that falls under the state government, you guys have a branch of Utah State here. We've got Snow College just over the mountain where I am. Again, we have our bigger universities. The ability to use them to do research. We're so lucky to live in an era of big data when we know more about the human condition than ever before. We know what makes people tick and why we make the decisions we make. We're learning more and more about us. It's actually kind of scary sometimes, right? I mean, Amazon, I think, knows more about me and my family than we know about ourselves, it seems like. They always know what I need and when I need it, it seems like. So we can learn a lot about the human condition and, again, what it takes to help people move out of poverty. So we have that. The other thing the government can do is we can bring people together. There are an enormous amount of very well-intentioned people in this state doing great things. And it's something I'm most proud of. I say it everywhere I go. We volunteer more than any other state in the nation. So we have private entities doing good things. We've got businesses, some of them represented here, who volunteer their time and their staff and their means to good causes. We have an incredible nonprofit groups across the state who are engaged in this effort. We have faith-based groups, again, incredible faith-based groups, many different organizations that are devoted to caring for the poor, and then we have government programs, and we have people engaged in those as well. So what we can do is bring all of them together, use the data, not be scared of the data, but use the data to inform us on best practices, on ways to help lift people out of poverty, and we can align those if we're working together instead of working in cross purposes. We all get in the room together and say, okay, we're doing this, what are you doing? And so we're spending our limited resources in a more effective manner. It's amazing as we do this right, it actually is, it happens to be the right thing to do and the fiscally conservative thing to do at the same time. This is one of those win-wins for everybody. And I often offend people in the room. I tell my Republican friends that we need Republicans to use their hearts a little more as we talk about these things. And I tell my Democrat friends we need them to use their heads a little more as we find these solutions and work together. And so I think there's an opportunity for us to come together. Now, the last piece of this, though, is the kids. And that goes back to my very first experience. I believe that as we look holistically at the families and focus on the children, on making sure they have the opportunities to break this chain, to have success, I think that's where we can make the biggest impact. That doesn't mean we ignore the families. It's the exact opposite. It means we help support the families so that the kids can have new and better opportunities. And it's important. We're going to talk a lot about statistics, but at the end of the day, it's always about the individual. That's the only way we solve this. Every one of these families is unique. They're not a statistic. They all have a very different circumstance, a very different situation, and we've got to find the way to plug those holes and help them lift themselves out of poverty. So with that, I just want to thank you for being here. We're not trying to recreate the wheel in any way, shape, or form, and we're not here to tell you what to do. It's very important. Our first county we went to was Weber County. I assure you that inner city Ogden is very, very different than Carbon County. And your needs are different, your assets are different, your people are different, your opportunities are different. Rural Utah is very unique. Greg Bell told me, he said, it's really hard to live in Sanpete County. You have to really want to live in Sanpete County. And I think that can be said about just about every county in rural Utah in some form. And we come from very hardy stock, right? We settled these places, our parents, grandparents, great-great-great-grandparents, when nobody else was here, and sometimes for a reason, that there weren't, that people didn't want to come here. And so I really feel like we have an opportunity here to do something special, to change the trajectory. Government can't continue to grow and fund these. We just run out of money eventually. So we've got to find a way to fix it. We've got to find a way to fix it together. So I've talked too much. I'm going to turn the time over to John Pierpont here, and he's going to give you a little bit of the background of how we got here.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. I said this yesterday, and I'll say it again. It's an impossible position to be number 2 on the agenda after the Lieutenant Governor, because he does such a fine job articulating the concern we have with intergenerational poverty across the state. I wanted to just provide some brief background on how we got in front of you all today, and we appreciate the commissioners and the mayor for hosting us, and for all of you for being here and being interested in the subject. So it goes back about 4 years when Lieutenant Governor mentioned Stuart Reed from Ogden. And he approached the Department of Workforce Services and started poking around and asking questions, as those 104 legislators tend to do. And so one of the key questions that he not only asked once, probably a half dozen times, is, do you believe, as a department, we have a welfare dependency issue in Utah? And we were quick, as good leaders in state government, to show our outcomes and show the results that we get with the programs that we run as a department. That wasn't good enough for him. He wanted to see the data, and he wanted us to do a little deeper dive into the data to really articulate whether or not there was some connection in regards to welfare dependency. And me being around for 23 years in this department was actually a little surprised by the result that we discovered. We all have anecdotes and know families that the Lieutenant Governor has described in his area. We all have those across the state that have been in public service or in state government. And so we started to dig into the data and discovered that there was definitely a connection between if you spent time as a child on public assistance, you're more likely to be dependent on public assistance or welfare as an adult. Okay, and we can see that now 4 generations back as far as our data goes. Okay, so Stuart Reed, in his good wisdom, and I've spent a lot of time with that man and continue to debate on certain issues. One of the things that he did was pass a couple of pieces of legislation that really got us to where we are today. One was, if you're a legislation geek, I want to say, Senate Bill 37 is the first bill that he passed, enacting the Intergenerational Poverty Mitigation Act. And that essentially required the Department of Workforce Services to do a data report each year and report that to the governor of the state as well as the state legislature. Okay? So we did our first report in 2012. That's when the legislation was passed. And we only had access really to our own internal data at Workforce Services. So we learned a lot in that first year and started to really understand the challenges that these families are facing across the state. And this is something that impacts every county of this state. Cache down to Washington and everywhere in between, these families have some challenges in regards to many different issues. So we've been producing that report for 4 years. You have the fourth iteration of that in front of you. There'll be another report that will be produced on October 1st, and we will continue to build out data with what we currently have in place, but other data sources as we move forward. So in the 3 years after that first, we entered into several memos of understanding between other agencies to start to gather said than done when you talk about privacy and the things that other agencies are dealing with in regards to these families. So what you see in front of you is a more robust set of data than we did in that original data report. The second piece of legislation that Senator Reed passed, and this was very strategic, and we had a lot of discussions on what that should look like, is he created an Intergenerational Welfare Reform Commission. Okay? I've served as a chair of that over the last 4 years now, as a vice chair with the LG now, serving as the chair of the commission. It includes Department of Human Services, and Ann Williamson is here representing the commission as well as her department, the Department of Health Director, the state school superintendent, and the court administrator for the state. Because his experience in inner city Ogden is he was interacting with all these agencies, with the families that he was serving in inner city Ogden as an ecclesiastical leader in his area of the state. So we created the commission. We're trying to figure out what the role exactly should be of the commission. He also created an advisory committee. And Bishop David Burton from the LDS Church serves as the chair of that. And then it's an 11-member committee that Mayor Piccolo also serves on, and Ben Gibbs, who's here from Brigham Young University, and advises the commission on policy type issues. And they have expertise in certain areas of child well-being. And Tracy Gruber will talk a bit about the 4 focus areas that the commission has put forward in regards to trying to tackle intergenerational poverty. Okay? And so we've been at that for the last several years. The legislation required a 5 and 10-year plan. You don't have that in front of you, but you can get that on our website, jobs.utah.gov. The 5 and 10-year plan is there. It focuses on key objectives and strategies to try to address it as a state, and you can read through that. The next phase of this for the commission is really why we're here today. And the Lieutenant Governor said it well, state government is not going to solve this problem alone. We're here to be a key partner with the commissioners, the mayor, and all of you to try to figure out what we can do differently to try to serve these families that we're all interacting with. And so that's why we're here today, is really to give you a snapshot of your county and try to compel you to be interested in and to try to tackle this along with us and others that want to be a part of it. So one of the things that, as a part of the legislation, was better coordination between state agencies. And we've been at that for the last year's period to align service delivery, to make better policy decisions that are not done in silos, because we're all serving these families in different capacities based on the programs that we're being asked to deliver as agencies. So as I talked about the commission members, we have staff that meet frequently to really do some work in that regard to try to align the work of the agencies. So with that as kind of the background of where we're at, I think the Lieutenant Governor's done a good job of describing situational poverty versus intergenerational. And that's really what we want to try to tackle across the state. And we need you all to assist us in that effort. So with that, I'm going to turn some time to Ann Williamson, who's the director of the Department of Human Services, and then we're going to show you a quick video.
Thank you so much, John, and good afternoon to everyone. Ann Silverberg Williamson. I'm the Executive Director to Utah's Department of Human Services, and as a member of the Intergenerational Poverty Commission, indeed, as John and the Lieutenant Governor have said, we are fiercely committed to breaking cycles of intergenerational poverty, to recognizing that the well-being of children, youth, adults, families, and individuals are most likely to be realized when we are focused on their ability to be successful in their homes, schools, and communities, to be safe themselves, and to contribute to the safety, the well-being, and the success of our local communities across the state of Utah. When we act upon this conviction in the Department of Human Services, which spans juvenile justice services, child and family services, services to people with disabilities, as well as services for mental health and addressing substance use disorders, aging and adult services, and also the Office of Recovery Services. You can imagine then the value and the import that we place on partnerships. Very happy to see Karen Dolan and Four Corners here with us today, as well as the courts, probation, and the bench all across the state of Utah. We just really understand the interdependency that localized success will foster. And so our belief is that the inherent ability of any individual can most fully be realized and able to be appreciated, to realize the greatest success for children, youth, families, and communities when we are practicing a true system of care approach, a localized system that is culturally competent in its practice, that is trauma-informed, that delivers a wraparound service to fidelity, which empowers family voice, which is youth-guided, and therefore leads to sustainable solutions that are not just about addressing the crises of the immediate and the short term that present themselves, as we've heard about situational poverty, but really understand what it means to place others on a trajectory, working with them, empowering them, hearing their voices of what's going to allow them to foster the greatest results and the greatest outcomes that we seek for ourselves, for our state, and for our communities. And so with that, it is a privilege to serve beside you and a true honor to join you today to assure that we are about your community, your potential, and your ideals for success for many generations to come. Thanks so much.
So one of the things that we want to make sure that we always do is that there are individuals and people that are in intergenerational poverty. And you're going to hear a lot about data today. And what we wanted to do is just show a quick video clip of an individual by the name of Mellow Day that is a part of our Next Generation Kids pilot that is going on in inner city Ogden. She's a part of that program and really has a perspective that's unique, but is relevant to what the discussion is today. So we want to show you that, and then we'll get into the data a bit more. Sorry.
My 20s, I decided to go back to school, get my GED. Then my son came along and we struggled for a while. I don't get child support. And so it's been a big struggle. I'm trying to find work, find childcare, I can go and get a $9 an hour job and struggle. My rent goes up, my benefits go down, and it's still the same spot. That cycle of not being able to make it, almost getting there, but not quite, having things taken away right as I'm getting to that point. I was struggling, I didn't have a job and I needed some financial assistance, and then came the Next Generation Kids project. The major thing that we were working on in the beginning was my mental health status and getting mentally healthy and then physically healthy. It wasn't until we got into the Next Generation Kids that it was like Zen became a focus as well. His success and his, the things that we needed to do for him. Everybody getting on Zen's team In 2 months, he made it to the 1st grade. With this, the main point, me and Zen's well-being, to be able to excel and participate. Zen has been included in a lot of the activities that I've been able to participate in with the Next Generation kids. It's created a stronger bond between us because we're doing things together. It's not just mom has to do this, mom has to do that. It's Zen, we're going to do this. They are implementing programs to help people like us. There are lots of people working on helping us. And I believe that there are a lot of brilliant minds that are lost to poverty right now. And I think this is a great opportunity to find those brilliant minds and bring them up and out.
So my task is to bring the data and connect with the individuals like Melody and make sure that although we are looking at numbers, we're keeping people like Melody in our minds as we move forward and learn some things from the data to help in the work of filling gaps and addressing challenges and also leveraging strengths in the communities throughout Utah. Just click it. Oh, there we go. Okay. Technology's not my forte. So with that, you've got the slide deck that we're going to go through today, and there's also the annual report in there, which really is all of the statewide data. I'm going to focus some of your attention on your local data in Carbon County, and you do have a one-page data snapshot that has some of that local data in there. But I'm also going to provide some context for the data. And one of the huge strengths right now in Utah is that our economy is doing incredibly well. We have one of the lowest unemployment rates in the nation, our job growth is one of the highest, and we have diversity in our economic sectors throughout the state. And that has led to our poverty rate on the national level being much lower than other parts of the nation. But there's lots of room for improvement, and Utah's child poverty rate is sitting at about 15%. It has improved since the economic recovery, and the overall poverty rate is about 12%. But we do have this issue with intergenerational poverty, and without going back into the distinctions of situational and intergenerational, I do want to provide a starting off point so everybody knows who we've identified and who we're tracking and following progress with throughout the state of Utah and hopefully within Carbon County. And that's this slide that's represented behind me. And it shows on the top line the universe of all adults receiving public assistance in the state of Utah within 4 different types of public assistance programs, where the eligibility for those programs is most tied to the federal poverty rate. And that's Medicaid and CHIP, food stamps, child care subsidies, and cash assistance. And when you look at that top line of all the adults in Utah, you'll see that one green individual, and that green individual represents the adults who are receiving public assistance currently, who also received it as children. Back to 1989, where we look at our records, and we've identified about 21% of Utah's public assistance population received it as children. And I think that's a lot smaller number than people think it is. People think that people spend a lot, or the perception is that people are on public assistance for an inordinate amount of time. We do look at average length of time, but about 21% receive public assistance as children. And underneath those adults, we have their kids. And there's 2 groups of kids that we've identified and that we're tracking and that we're focusing the data around. And the green children, those 48,281, again, these are statewide numbers, are children of the intergenerational poverty adult cohort. And then you look at that 234,000, those are the children of the adults who are currently receiving public assistance, but we don't have any record that they received it as children. And when you add those 2 numbers of kids together, that bottom line, that makes up about 31% of Utah's child population between the ages of 0 and 17. So it's not an insignificant amount, and we track both groups, not just the intergenerational poverty children, but also those public assistance children, because research tells us that when you grow up in poverty and grow up in economic scarcity, you're more likely to remain there as an adult. So we look at both groups. John mentioned that every corner of our state is impacted, and that is indeed the case. Some corners more than others. The bulk of our population is located on the Wasatch Front, but in some of our counties, we're seeing a greater number of children who are at risk of remaining in poverty than in other areas. And those highest numbers are those counties that are represented in dark blue. Since the focus in the Intergenerational Poverty Mitigation Act is on the children, we look at all of our data through the eyes of the child, and we categorize the indicators that we track in 4 areas of child well-being. Again, all of the work and the data ties back to evidence-based programs and research, and these 4 areas of child well-being, research says, are critically important for children to have a foundation for success into adulthood. And those areas are early childhood development, education, family economic stability, and health. This next slide, we're starting to get into a little bit of the economic data and the local data, and this slide represents the Carbon County economy as it currently sits, with its growth in jobs and unemployment rate and employment across all the sectors in your county. The beauty of having data, as the Lieutenant Governor mentioned, is that we're able to know more about the human condition than we ever have been able to know before. And we also are able to identify where people reside. And that allows us to make sure that limited resources that communities have are targeted in the best way. And one of the ways we can do that is by knowing where people are located. So this slide shows the distribution of where the intergenerational poverty adults are located, and notes that of all of the adults in Carbon County, 11% are experiencing intergenerational poverty. And similarly, we go to the next slide where we know that all of the children are also located. And the number that's on that slide, it tends to be a lot larger than what people expect and tends to be very alarming. And it is a combination of both the intergenerational poverty children, the children of those intergenerational poverty adults, and also the children whose parents receive public assistance who we don't have record of receiving it as kids. And in this county, it's 42%. I mentioned at the state level, 31% of Utah's 0 to 17-year-old population is at risk of remaining in poverty. In Carbon County, we calculate that at 42%, and this table allows you to see where those children are located. One of the key areas of child well-being I mentioned was family economic stability. And although we look at most of our data through the lens of the child, we are looking at some of the indicators of the adults, because we know that if adults don't have wages or have incomes insufficient to meet the needs of the children are going to have challenges. And our starting off point with this data is the percentage of the intergenerational poverty adults who and their level of educational attainment. And we're finding throughout the state that a significant amount of these adults lack an education beyond high school. And here in Carbon County, we see that 79% of the intergenerational poverty adults lack an education beyond high school. That number at the statewide level is 74%. And that then draws a correlation between their ability to obtain and maintain employment and also obtain a wage sufficient to meet the needs of their families. This pie chart represents their level of employment, the intergenerational poverty adults' level of employment in 2014. And we see that 30% of them roughly were employed all 4 quarters of 2014, and 27% had some level of employment in 2014. So 56% of these intergenerational poverty adults are coming in and out of the labor force, which is contrary, again, to stereotype. I think in a lot of places, the perception or the stereotype is that they're not working, that these families just are collecting public assistance and not employed. And our data that we collect shows a story that's a little bit different. It shows that they come into labor multiple times throughout the year, and most of them are trying to have stable employment. But that in and out and that sporadic attachment to the labor force is resulting in incredibly low wages for the year. And as I mentioned, most of these adults have children. So when you see a wage for the year of $10,000 here in Carbon County and $11,520 statewide, we can see how this makes it incredibly difficult for them to meet the needs of their children. A very large focus of our data is on education. Again, going back to that very first Carbon County slide about the educational attainment of the adults. We know, again, based on research, that if you have an education beyond high school in the modern economy, the unemployment rate is much lower for that population of adults. So having a quality education really starting in early childhood is becoming critically important and is a definite focus of the effort. And what we're seeing is this kind of another indication of the ongoing cycle with the parents, lack of education beyond high school, is this very low graduation rate amongst the intergenerational poverty children. The number's gone up since the first time we looked at it, from 50 to 57% of the intergenerational poverty kids are graduating, but significantly lower than the statewide rate. Throughout the state of Utah. And when we think about goals that have been established at the statewide level to make sure that 66% of the population has an education beyond high school, some sort of post-secondary education, and we've got a graduation rate amongst the IGP children of 57%, we know that there's significant room for improvement and ways to address that. Another indicator that we look in the area of education, and again, the report has a lot more of this data, from standardized test scores to ACT scores. We also look at chronic absence, which is becoming a new area of focus in education. Typically in schools, they look at average daily attendance to see what percentage of their pupil population is showing up every day. When you're looking at chronic absence, you're really looking at the individual child, and it's a measure of what percentage of the students in the school are missing 10% or more of the school year, which is only 18 days, which isn't a lot. But those absences end up compounding, and we see that children who are chronically absent year after year are performing poorly on their standardized test scores, and it's leading to much higher dropout rates, and there's research that supports that. And we focus our attention particularly on the early grades, because those grades are so foundational, and if they're coming to school regularly in those early grades, that sets them up for success later on. Going back to the local data, again, we know where the students are located throughout the school district. We know how many intergenerational poverty students are in the school and how many students who have received public assistance. Those are those public assistance children, and what percentage. And then again, we see that chronic absence number, and that's the chronic absence number for the whole school. In some of the schools, the rate for chronic absence is higher than in others. John mentioned that we combine our data across not just the Department of Workforce Services, but in all of these different sectors, so that we are able to paint a fuller picture of the barriers and challenges that are occurring in the lives of these kids. And what we're seeing is that a lot of the challenges are going beyond economics. And we're seeing some strong correlations in different systems throughout the state. And this next slide represents one of those correlations, which is that amongst the intergenerational poverty children between the ages of 10 and 17, 48% of the children in Carbon County, the intergenerational poverty children, have some involvement with the juvenile justice system. So almost 50% of the intergenerational poverty kids are interacting with juvenile justice once they hit their youth and into their teen years. Similarly, we look at the area of childhood abuse and neglect. I mentioned that one of the 4 focus areas of child well-being is early childhood development. And when we look at research, we're learning more and more at an incredibly rapid rate about what is going on in the brain development of really an infant. And most brain development occurs between the ages of 0 and 3 years old. And we're seeing that through research. And what we've also seen most recently is that there's a very strong connection between traumatic experiences in early childhood and adverse childhood experiences that occur in childhood, and the connection to long-term health outcomes into adulthood. And not just physical health outcomes. We know that rates of heart disease go up in adulthood for adults who are victims of some sort of trauma, diabetes, but we also see increased riskier behaviors in this population and mental health challenges, because the long-lasting effects of trauma in early childhood carry out when they are not mitigated. And I like to point out that they can all be mitigated. There are tools and evidence-based programs out there that can mitigate some of the trauma that's occurring in these families. And this slide on abuse and neglect is another slide that has some state data, so Carbon County knows where they're at in the data, as well as some local data. And this slide reflects substantiated cases of abuse and neglect amongst the intergenerational poverty, not only child population, but also the adult population. So again, our partners at the Department of Human Services looked back in time at their records to see how many of the intergenerational poverty adults were victims of a substantiated case of abuse or neglect when they were children. And we're seeing that roughly 1/3 of those adults fell into that category. And then we're seeing 40% of the children in intergenerational poverty in Carbon County have been victims of a substantiated case of abuse and neglect. So that data just provides that benchmark. Because of the lasting effects, and we know how behavioral health fits into all of this and makes it challenging to obtain employment, be successful in school, we're also looking at indicators of behavioral health and involvement with the behavioral health system. So this next slide represents the people within the intergenerational poverty population who received mental health services at the local level in 2014. And you can see the dark blue bars are the statewide data for each of the cohorts that we've identified, from the adults to the youth to the children, and then the Carbon County data. So every year we are pulling together some more data that we think will be informative both at the state level, because there are some things that could be done statewide, and then also at the local level. At this point, we have the data, and in some cases the local data is easier to obtain than the statewide data, and we just look forward to partnering and helping you with additional data and finding out what data you might be able to obtain. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Which means that anybody here can ask her some questions. I would, Tracy, if you don't mind, I think it'd probably be an appropriate time to open up questions for everybody. And so there may be some questions that come back directed towards you, but if everybody is available. Right now is the opportunity to kind of cover some of those questions. Before we get into the questions and answers, though, we've got a little bit of time. Tiffany, I didn't give you forewarning on this, but I would like you to kind of come and present to some of the state people and some of the community at large. We haven't actually done a press release, have we yet, Shannon? But if you'd give perhaps the first introduction to the CARE Coalition, what it stands for, and perhaps how this coalition that we've been setting up for substance abuse could also be a great catalyst for the intergenerational poverty.
Hello. Thank you, Jake, for asking me to speak. My name is Tiffany Van Sickle, and I'm the Substance Use Prevention Coordinator for Four Corners. And so some of you may know my statewide counterpart, Craig Povey. He's very involved on a state level of addressing these issues. And through the efforts of prevention within our state system, we've identified a evidence-based model for addressing these community issues, and some of you may be familiar with that, the Communities That Care model. This is an evidence-based process for local communities to go about addressing some of these issues of youth delinquency and outcome behaviors such as substance use, dropout, teen pregnancy, all of those indicators that directly align with intergenerational poverty, not only in terms of maintaining intergenerational poverty, but being that first domino that leads to it being a new family in intergenerational poverty. So as part of that effort, Carbon County has established this community coalition. It's called the CARE Coalition, the Carbon Addiction Reduction and Elimination Coalition. And it's a very exciting opportunity. Just for real quick, I want anyone who's here who's involved with our community coalition to raise their hands really quick so that they can kind of see the diversity of what we have with our community coalition, and particularly those that are sharing the stage with you. This effort to fulfill the Communities That Care Coalition model to fidelity, it's required to hire a part-time coordinator for this position, and the state division generously offers a matching grant to hire that position. And in our community, to achieve that matching grant, I'm very proud to say that our key leader board has collaboratively come together to get that matching grant. So we have a financial contribution coming from our county government, all four of the city governments, the university, the hospital, Four Corners, and the school district. And all of those members sit on our key leader board that guides all of our efforts. And where we're at in the stage of that process is we've done a community needs assessment. And our community needs assessment has looked at a lot of this data that you've shared with us today, in addition to our Student Health and Risk Prevention Survey, the SHARP survey that hopefully you are familiar with. And in that process, we looked at a lot of that data, and our priority area is substance use. We look at outcome data for many domains of outcomes, such as school dropout, teen pregnancy, and substance use. And Carbon County School District has awesome graduation rates. So a great job to Carbon County School District. They have excellent graduation rates. And our teen pregnancy rates are lower than the national average and on a very low level. But our substance use rates, unfortunately, exceed the state rate and are very high. We have the second highest opioid overdose rate in the state. And as you know, Utah is sixth in the nation. So it's definitely an area for concern. But we don't stop there of just looking at saying, well, substance use is a problem, so let's do something about that. The SHARP survey, designed around the Communities That Care Youth survey, looks at what puts them at risk for that. Where in our population is that risk? And that's where we're at with our needs assessment report. And there's a couple up there. I have a couple more. This is just a draft. The community board for our coalition is made up of representatives across 12 community sectors, ranging from the faith sector to school to business, youth serving organizations, healthcare. And that community board assigned a work group that is our data assessment work group that has worked on this report. And they've reviewed all of that data, the SHARPS data, in addition to publicly available data, and this is a draft of that report. This draft was just completed. The work group finished their work last week, and we were just working on it some today, and it hasn't made it to approval from our community board, and it will have to eventually get approval from our key leader board, made up of all of those leadership members that are here with us today as well. So it is just at a draft at this stage. But as you can see, the priority areas that we're looking at right now is low commitment to school, early initiation of antisocial behavior, and depressive symptoms. I think it's pretty obvious the overlap that's happening here between the data that we've seen today and what we're seeing directly from our youth. And just as Lieutenant Governor Cox talked about focusing on those kids, This is the area where we're getting information directly from the kids' mouths. These are kids sitting in chairs at our school that are giving us this information across the board, whether they're currently receiving services or not. This is a good cross-section of what's going on with our kids. So from here, from our needs assessment report, we will be forming a community resource assessment work group that will identify what resources are currently available in the community that are addressing these key areas that we've identified. And we'll do an analysis over those and what some of the barriers of those resources are and where we might be able to create more success, and if there are legitimate gaps that we don't have resources for right now. And eventually that will lead to a strategic plan. Hopefully sometime this fall, we will have a strategic plan that will be a comprehensive, full look at what these needs were, what our resources are and our gaps, and then develop a strategic plan that will include where can we find resources to address that strategic. So certainly having partners like you that we can hand that strategic plan to say, this is what we know we need for our community. Can you be partners with us to help us identify resources to create a sustainable approach to address these issues so that it's not grant cycle after grant cycle, but sustainably, how do we create an infrastructure to get these kids out of the situation so we don't just creating the cycle over and over. So very excited to partner with you, and very excited. There's certainly many CTC coalitions throughout the state, so hopefully good partnerships can be developed across the board, whether it's here locally in Carbon County or in San Pete and in Grand County and San Juan. Across our state, we're trying to build this infrastructure to address these issues. So I'm very grateful to all of you, and exceedingly grateful to all of our key leaders who have joined together to support this process locally, and our community members that both have sat on our community board and been through our data assessment work group. I am so proud to be a part of Carbon County. This is truly a community that cares, that wants to address this issue for their community. So I'm very excited about
Tiffany,
that.
real fast before you sit down, could you just quickly discuss or mention, if you can off the top of your head, as many as you can, the 12 sectors or the number, the different agencies that are involved with the CARE Coalition, so we can understand what members of the community are involved, and then we can have a panel discussion.
Okay. So our key leader board, as I said, is made up of the university chancellor, the CEO from the hospital, the director of the health department, our executive director at Four Corners, Karen Dolan, the superintendent, leadership from all 4 of the city governments within Carbon County. So some of that is mayor, some of it's city council members they've assigned as that, but we have representation from all 4 city councils. I said the superintendent, the hospital, Four Corners, trying to think of them off the top of my head.
Well, we've got like Emory Telecom.
The sheriff is our key leader, and we have law enforcement representation. That's Sheriff Wood was our champion that really helped pull this together. So he really got all the other key leaders to the table. So certainly very impressed with Sheriff Wood and his commitment to this process, and our partnerships with law enforcement are very, very valuable. So that's our key leader board that is made up of all those leaderships that sort of wield resources and will be part of our programming partners. And then our community board is made up of representatives across 12 community sectors, and those 12 community sectors include school, parents, youth, healthcare, substance use treatment and prevention, business, media, youth-serving organizations, fraternal organizations, faith-based organizations, missing one in there, but then other community members. So our community board is made up of representatives from across those 12 community sectors. So that when we have our board meetings and our community board is looking at this data, we're really getting that cross-sector of throughout the community, where are people seeing and viewing this data, and how does it interpret to them in the faith community and the youth serving organizations and across that picture. And then that goes to our key leaders, who are then going to really support this and back it across the board. So hopefully, and that's really part of the fidelity model for communities that care, is to set up that infrastructure. And then below the community board even, they then assign work groups and task force that will do things like the specific data review and work on this project. We'll have a resource assessment work group. We have a youth engagement work group that's also formed that will help us develop youth coalitions that are youth coming together to address these issues, which is an amazing project. We have a great youth coalition out in Emory County that went out to DC in February and was speaking to our national legislators about these issues, and so very proud of them, and we're working on developing that here. So we have a work group within the coalition, and those are seated by even more members of the community that come in that help us on just those projects for the work group. So we're really trying to very diversify how we bring people to the table so that this is a community-wide effort, because it is the community that cares, not Four Corners that cares, or Castleview Hospital or Carbon School District. This is an issue that is so pervasive to all of us, and so we really want to bring that collaborative effort together so we're not working in silos. We are doing that systems of care approach to addressing our issues locally.
Thank you, Tiffany.
Yeah, thank you.
Commissioners and members of the Intergenerational Welfare Reform Commission, we wanted to present a little bit of the efforts and organization that we've put together in preparation for this meeting, and now hope for a productive discussion in regards to, a panel discussion with input from the audience if needed on where we go from here.
If I may, we need a Tiffany in every area of the state.
I almost
How do we
asked-
replicate Tiffany?
You do, but they're not Tiffany, and we might have to we might have to steal her.
I would just say it's an excellent start, obviously. I mean, you're very well organized. We haven't seen this level of organization thus far. I think people are trying, but to maybe mentor other communities that we're going out and talking with may be beneficial to them. But you're clearly steps ahead of some of the others, and we admire what you're doing. It's very impressive.
I'll see you in Grant on the 1st.
Okay.
So I've got another intergenerational poverty forum, that discusses the 10-year plan and the 5-year plan and some different things. I would imagine that you would expect us to come up with our own specific to Carbon County.
Yeah, and so through the coalition that you've already started, I mean, again, I'm just soaking this all in. This is wonderful, and I didn't know you were so far ahead here. We have some resources available, some grant money available to help with that planning process, and to help again. Every county is just so unique, and you've already identified one issue where you stand out, and not in a positive way, right? With substance abuse, and the factors that go into that are you mentioned the overlap with exactly what we're talking about, and so again, you're well ahead of the curve. These grants will be available to every county that wants to participate. Again, to help with some planning money, so you can bring these people together, start working through this, find out what's working in your community, what's not. Again, evidence-based is so important, so we can see the results, right? And we're going to learn from each county. I expect a year from now, 2 years from now, we'll continue to follow up and say, okay, Carbon's got this down. Sanpete needs help here. Weber needs help here. What can we learn from each other? But that is definitely one of the next steps.
And so with the CARE Coalition and their committee, who would they be contacting in regards to some of these grants and funding mechanisms for design and for planning?
So the grants will come out of Workforce Services. Tracy Gruber will be your contact. We're looking at, do we decide July to release the grants to the 12 counties that are that we're currently focused on addressing this issue. So look for something around July if you have questions about what that might look like. They're non-compete grants. They're grants that we want to provide a level of support to all of you to start to build out additional strategies that align with what the commission and the advisory committee have put forward from the state level.
Tracy, what would be some of the stipulations, or what can some of this grant money be used for? Can it be used for the personnel? Can it be used for programs or advertising? I don't know.
Well, right now we've just it's just going to be released as planning money for any of the counties. It's not a huge amount of money, but it's the ability for you to bring everybody together who needs to be around the table to help with the plan. It's also going to include some training modules to help counties. We noted that you're much further along than some of these other counties. I mean, some counties are at the stage that they need to know how to even convene a group of people and how to establish that common goal, and how do you get the local data. So everybody's at a different stage, but it's also going to include some of those training modules that we're partnering with USU Extension to develop to help walk counties through the development of the plan. We haven't gotten down to the details, but it's going to be pretty much up to the counties on how they want to use those resources in the development of the plan. At the end of the grant cycle, we would anticipate a deliverable would be a plan to address intergenerational poverty within the county, either through identifying an issue that's holding the county and is impacting and influencing intergenerational poverty, with that 5 and 10-year plan that the commission's adopted in mind, so that any county efforts who are receiving the grant are kind of rolling up their efforts into that 5 and 10-year plan.
Part of the Steve Carlson, Superintendent, would you like to come to the mic?
Thank you. My name's Steve Carlson. I'm the Superintendent of Carbon School District, and I think one thing we've not mentioned today, I really appreciate this, is Carbon School District is part of the Intergenerational Poverty Grant for school-age students. And we have the grant, and today we have Judy Maynard, who's been our grant director, if you'd raise your hand, Judy. And then we have Elisa Morley that was hired. We're in our planning stages right now. Elisa is our director of our grant. We're working in our 5 elementary schools, and you saw those numbers up there. And right now we're in the planning stages and the hiring stages. This year we've been able to plan and hire a director for every one of the sites, the 5 elementaries. This is going to include an after-school program that's going to allow for us, there's enough money to pay for a director at each school site, to pay for mentors, to pay for teachers to stay after school to help kids in intergenerational poverty. It's just a great thing, and we will start officially at the beginning of the school next year with this. And with the grant, I believe this year was number 1 of the 5 years, and then we'll have 4 years after that in the program. And we're really excited, and I know the mayor was on a committee quite a while ago that helped get this thing going, and we're really, really excited about it. And a couple other plugs I need to put in while I'm up here. You saw our graduation rate, but when you talk about juvenile justice system, before I came here, this is my 5th year here, I was in North Summit School District in Colville in Summit County. Totally different in North Summit, totally different demographics. And I see personally, from the superintendent's standpoint, the impact that poverty has, and intergenerational poverty even more so, has on education. And it's just huge. And one of the things I need to put a pitch in is, as our juvenile justice system has worked with us, that is part of the reason we have such a high graduation rate. Once a kid gets into the system, they've worked with us, Judge Manley and Judge Johansson, who, you know, from our perspective, unfortunately decided to retire with his health issue. And so we're sitting on pins and needles with the next appointment of who the next judge is, and I think that's right now in the works. And so it's very important that we have that support from our juvenile justice system to keep this thing going. You know, there are other things. We have an alternative school. Our Carbon High does a great job with that graduation rate, and so it's just a great thing. So we have some things going, and I'm very excited to see what's going to happen with our after-school program. And there's music involvement. There's just all kinds of things that will keep the kids at school probably until, I don't know, 5:30, 6 o'clock. These ladies back here know the particulars. I just get to brag about what they're doing, and so they're doing a great job. I'm really excited, and we'll be able to tell you more a year from now where we see this thing going. So anything I can. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent.
Thank you, Steve. And also, Carrie Allred with Head Start wasn't able to be here today, but she did want to have mentioned that she's very interested in participating and helping out where she can. There's, I guess, some new programs or some programs she's ramping up with in regards to our younger kids. You know, and I don't want the reform board, the welfare reform board, to think that we've got it all figured out. Well, this is just a bunch of community members that have been scrambling because we recognize there's an issue. at the state level, you see that we have an issue. We recognize it as well. We still would like advice and counsel and perhaps some wherewithal on what resources are available to us. We are ready to implement those resources. The community has banded together and donated money from the various entities and governments to partially fund, with hopeful match from the state, an employee to spearhead some of these efforts. We're looking to do a lot of great things, and just because we might be wowing you, because we might be a little ahead of the curve, we don't want to fall behind the curve either.
Yeah.
So, and part of the reason why thanks to Tiffany and thanks to Sheriff Wood and the CARE Coalition and their organization, but also in regards to intergenerational poverty, the reason that we are as we are is because of Shelley Ivey and a little bit of the efforts that she's had as the regional DWS director, coming to our community and bending our ears. Shelley, would you mind coming to the mic? I know you hate this public speaking bit.
She does, very much so.
And she's never going to call me
This
again.
is another test. It'll be awesome.
I've just freed my schedule for the next little while.
I thought I was your friend.
I know, right? But could you kind of give us maybe an idea of DWS's role with the IGP effort going forward?
Well, I don't want to speak for Tracy, but of course I work very closely with Tracy. We put a lot of time in the car
Yes,
together.
I didn't want to take words from Tracy, but you specifically with us here in Carbon County.
Well, specifically with Carbon County, of course, you guys are all aware of the services we provide around temporary assistance, be that unemployment insurance for those individuals who are being laid off, or also those services around Medicaid for the health and well-being of our children, to financial and food assistance. We also help provide additional services through our AOG. I want to recognize Deb Hatt here and Jerry Gamber. I mean, they provide a lot of assistance, and they're a great partner for all of us in this room today. But we also provide services to help individuals gain those necessary skills so they can go out and gain employment that's going to support themselves and their family. We have a variety of training programs and services available, and I would love to spend time with anyone to educate them and tell them how they can access those services through our department. Also, I want to recognize, of course, we do have the mayor here. Jake also, he did not tell you guys, but he is also serving on the State Workforce Development Board, representing, of course, his business, but rural Utah. And he's also requested, he's worked today on the Operations Committee as we work in the Workforce Investment Opportunities Act. Jake has also volunteered to be on what we call our Pathways Committee, helping us develop pathways that will lead our youth from the school district, so thank you, Steve, for your comments, but also on to higher education so we can help meet the governor's goal of 66% by 2020. Jake, I'm not sure I answered your question, but I am here as a resource, so please feel free to contact myself if you can't get a hold of Tracy. Also know that we have Nicole Steele here, and you guys probably in this county know Nicole. She's very engaged and very involved. Zach Whitwell, who is also the area manager for the Department of Workforce Services Workforce Development Division. He's on a plane to South Carolina today, or he would be with us. But please know that we have a variety of services. We're here to assist. We work very closely with Joe Peterson and the USU Eastern and his staff to try to help build skills and meet the needs of employers. And that's a crucial part, is hearing from industry what industry needs so we can get individuals back to work. I do not want to forget our industry leaders who, of course, always rally to any cry we have in rural Utah. Did I help you?
That was perfect.
Thank you. I'm going to sit down now.
Yeah. With all the things you said about me, I think that's the last time I call on you. Part of the difficulty, I guess, is, as you mentioned, some communities haven't gotten all the people in the same room together yet. Knowing what each other is doing, what resources are available, what we can do and receive through the resources with DWS, with the AOG or ALG, or with with the different agencies. That's the reason, Tiffany, in the CARE Coalition, why there's those 12 sectors of people, and why, so that we're not duplicating work, we're not being redundant, but yet what one is doing can benefit the other if we just get together and we talk. In fact, earlier, Tiffany, you and Jerry Gamber were having a conversation of something that could benefit everybody, because you have data that can benefit her application, and the joint application would be much more powerful, or whatever. And so I believe that's a part of the effort, is really bringing the community together to work together, not just our community and the different government agencies and businesses, but individuals from the state, which is what this, if I'm speaking correctly, the whole Welfare Reform Commission is about.
That's correct.
But I'm speaking way too much, so commissioners, feel free to, commissioners and members of the Reform Commission.
If there are things that, as you continue to convene your CARE Coalition, that you need at the state level, you have Shelley, obviously, that's engaged. If Department of Human Services or Department of Health or even the state school superintendent, if there are things that you believe that you need support on as you move forward, those are the types of things that we'd like to hear from you on. We can give you access to Tracy with the data and so forth, but if there are other things that you need us to be a part of or at the table discussing, we're more than happy to be a part of that.
And sometimes those things, I want you to think big on this. Challenge everything. When you run into roadblocks, superintendent, anybody else, because the programs we have are designed wrong. Some of those we can change, some of them we can't. We try at the federal level, and we're willing to try at the federal level as well. Speaker Paul Ryan is interested in this at the national level. John and the governor have been back and met with him and shared some of what's happening here. But we really believe that this can be a model for the nation to change the trajectory of what's happening there. And so when you run into those roadblocks, oftentimes it's us getting out of the way and telling us how we can get out of the way or how we can let you do your jobs better. So please don't hesitate to challenge things. I think that's critical. I'm just so excited for what you're already doing, to see that buy-in and that vision coming. Mayor called me the other day to talk about some ideas about things we can do, helping some of these kids who maybe don't have the aptitude or are not interested in higher education, but could work with businesses. Their sophomore, junior, and senior years, where they're out there getting some real experience to where they have a job when they get out there. People are looking for employees. We understand that while the state is doing very well employment-wise, eastern Utah is struggling a little more because of the energy sector. So I was out in the basin last week here in coal country. All of my neighbors work in the coal mines, just over the hill. They come over here. So we get that, and we understand there are some unique challenges here. I just wanted to share one quick thing. We mentioned Senator Reed and his interest in this, and what I didn't tell you, the rest of the story was he had a young man come into his office who had recently joined the church. I think he was like 14 years old. His mom was not capable of much of anything. Severe paranoid schizophrenia, living in squalor, single mom, had no idea what her kid was doing most of the time, heavy drug user, illicit drug user, and this kid came in with not a chance in the world. I mean, statistically, the odds of this kid doing anything were slim to none. And he told this young man, he said, "You will be in my office every week. You will report to me. You will give me a list of every teacher. I want their phone numbers. I will call them every night. They will report to me about whether you were in school, what was happening. I will help provide for your mom as best I can over time." Started doing that after a couple years. It was again, this mom was incapable of caring for her son. He actually moved in with Senator Reed at some point. Long story short, he graduated valedictorian of his class. He got an engineering degree from BYU and is just unbelievably successful. And those stories are out there. That's why we do what we do. We can do it better. And I believe that if it can happen anywhere, it can happen here in the state of Utah. We had a reporter from New York come out here last week because Harvard had done a study and found out there was only one state left where kids were living the American dream and actually becoming more successful than their parents. It was happening here in Utah more than anywhere else. You can come up with your own reasons about why that's happening here and not other places. But we're at risk if we don't stay ahead of this to becoming just like everywhere else where that's not happening, where the American dream is dying. But I believe we can make a difference here, and we do it one student at a time. So thank you.
Very good. Well, if there's not any real pressing matters, anybody that has something else to ask or question, Lieutenant Governor said that we should challenge them and let them know if they need to get out of the way. And I was almost taking that as inviting us to tell them where to go, but no, of course not.
I
no.
get that all the time now.
No, we greatly appreciate you and the Reform Commission here with us in Carbon County. We want you to know that we're very serious about reform, about welfare reform, about intergenerational poverty, about everything that is associated with it, including substance abuse and all the issues. We want to do something about it. I think the fact that we have the people here today that we do have shows that we are working, and we want you to see that we are working towards it. We want to make something happen. And so if things come up, feel free to reach out and let us know. And if you wonder why we're doing something a certain way, call us, and we'll try to get out of the way if we're doing something wrong too. Commissioners, any other comments? If not, I think we can adjourn.
Thanks, everyone.